Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Erik Voss, and this is a breakdown of Wake Up Dead Man, a Knives Out mystery, the third Knives Out movie from director Rian Johnson, now streaming on Netflix. Just as I did for Knives Out and for Glass Onion, I loved watching this movie and rewatching it, not just for the clues Benoit Blanc illuminates for us in the final act, but for the intricate system of visual and auditory details that set up those great clues by masking them or teasing them at the perfect moments so that it all comes together so brilliantly for the viewer. So in this breakdown, I'm gonna go back through this movie scene by scene to point out each of those details that you missed and how cool it was that you missed them. Okay, we open this film with Daniel Craig's Benoit Blanc coming back with longer hair, reading a legal pad of the writing of Father Judd du Plessis, played by Josh O'Connor, or Prince Charles from The Crown.
I guess to tell the story of the Good Friday murder through my eyes, I gotta start here.
I love how this is a misdirect because we think Benoit Blanc is reading a letter from a client explaining why the detective needs to come out to help solve a mystery, but this is actually just what Blanc instructed Judd to write so that Blanc could see this impossible crime more clearly. And structuring it this way allows Rian Johnson to use the first act of the film to introduce the crime and the suspects, and then, unlike the past two films, delay the introduction of the investigator into later in the movie. Judd recalls punching an asshole deacon, and after knocking out the guy, you can see another priest in the background doing a sign of the cross. The senior priest tells Judd he needs to fight the world, but Judd pushes back.
A priest is a shepherd. The world is a wolf.
No.
Judd's objection outlines his whole perspective in this film, particularly against Monsignor Wicks. It's not about fighting the world, even in self-defense. It's about tending to the world's needs. Also, the wolf mentioned sets up the murder weapon of the devil wolf head from the lamp top. When Jeffrey Wright's Bishop Langstrom decides to send Father Judd to Chimney Rock, we see a stone crucifix in the courtyard with a pronounced rib cage. This will be the same design Father Judd carves into the ultimate crucifix at the end of the film to house the diamond. Chimney Rock is a fictional lakeside town in upstate New York. We see the rock of the town's name, a tall stone pillar with the haze of the surrounding lake making it look like it's puffing chimney smoke. They shot many of the exteriors at Cold Spring, New York, but they used the exterior of the Church of the Holy Innocents, which is located outside of London in the UK. And you can tell because this church is clearly several hundred years old, and most American Catholic churches aren't older than the country itself, especially since European Catholics didn't really immigrate here in droves until the mid to late 19th century. The church interior is all a set on a soundstage, which is how they're able to accomplish all the cool lighting effects they do in this film. As he arrives, Judd recalls being
Young, dumb, and full of Christ.
Ha! Oh man, this has got to be a reference Judd is pulling from his boxer days, as it's a much cleaner version of how Keanu Reeves is described in Point Break.
Young, dumb, and full of cum.
Now, the church even being called Our Lady of Perpetual Fortitude seems like it's also a nod to the fortitude of Sister Martha, and of course to Jefferson's mother, Grace, that poor girl. The film's title appears in this key shot. The light casts in from outside on the area where the crucifix used to be, and it will be this beam of sunlight that will ultimately reveal where the Joule ultimately resides. Monsignor Wicks, played by Josh Brolin, casts a heavy shadow over this empty space, symbolizing how this Monsignor sees himself as the only presence of Christ needed in this parish. The film's title, Wake Up Dead Man, comes from a phrase in the folk song, Ain't No More Cane on the Brazos, though Rian Johnson also said it's kind of derived from the title of the song of the same name by U2. Wicks says,
I see you've met Martha.
Martha? No.
Monsignor Wicks.
Martha, played by the great Glen Close, always is creeping around unnoticed. Rian Johnson grew up in a religious family, though not a Catholic family. He had some relatives in Denver who were Catholic that helped him in his research. I did grow up Catholic. I was an altar server, so this movie very much resonated with me, specifically the debate over the address of Monsignor, because Monsignor is a form of address or a title within the Catholic Church, referring to certain senior priests in the Catholic clergy. Monsignors don't rank higher than a normal priest in terms of holy orders. The pulpit in this church is designed to look like a tall bow of a ship, so Wicks can tower over the congregation like a Navy captain, but also, according to Rian Johnson, to make him look kind of like Captain Ahab for Moby Dick. Wicks asks Judd to take his confession, and the first sin he confesses is,
I've envied the material wealth of others.
Already we're being told that the greed is what ultimately drives Wicks, which Judd later points out due to Wicks' radical prostate removal 5 years earlier would make it impossible for him to get erections, making it a lie that Wicks is saying here just to make Judd uncomfortable. He even says that he finished into a copy of Catholic Chronicle magazine, knowing that there will be a copy on the side table of the bedroom Judd will soon be moving into. So basically, he's hazing the new priest by making him think that the room he's going to be taking is Wicks's goon cave. We meet the church groundskeeper, Samson, played by Thomas Hayden Church, who has been trying to stay sober all these years and has a flirty relationship with Martha. Judd explains how Martha does everything, dressing Wicks before mass services, which is how she'll sew the devil head on his vestments later, and he says this.
She knew where the bodies were buried.
Specifically Specifically, she knows that the Joule is buried with Prentice. Local kids tagged dicks all over Prentice's tomb, changing it from Wicks to Dicks. This scene, in addition to being comedic, is how we learn this thing has a Lazarus door, and it establishes why Samson installed a security camera that will later be very important to the plot. Martha tells Judd about Grace, the harlot whore of a mother to Jefferson, that his grandfather Prentice was widowed with, whom Prentice forced to stay with the family in order to get her vast inheritance. But when he died, his fortune had mysteriously vanished. Martha says some say Prentice threw it in the ocean. Now, the only way anyone could throw a fortune of $80 million into an ocean would be if it were in diamond form, like the heart of the ocean in Titanic that got dropped in the ocean at the end of that movie. So here, Martha is kind of dropping a clue that that fortune must have been turned into a diamond or something like it. The painting of Jesus that Grace destroys is one of the 15 stations of the cross. Jesus falls a third time, the 9th station, before Jesus is stripped of his clothes, the 10th station, nailed to the cross, the 11th station, raised up on the cross and dies, the 12th station, taken down from the cross, the 13th station, placed in the tomb, 14th station, and then the 15th station is only addressed on Easter Sunday, that's the resurrection. In Martha's first telling, she was just an innocent girl who was attacked by Grace, but later we'll see she was more of a little shit who laughed as Grace hit her. But when we cut back to Martha now, she still bears the scar that Grace gave her. So we meet the full flock, including Vera Draven, Kerry Washington, Wicks's attorney, and then her adopted son Cy Draven, Daryl McCormack, whom Vera had to raise when her father brought him home as what she thought was her father's illegitimate son. There's a local doctor, Nat Sharp, Jeremy Renner, who ultimately is the most craven murderer of this tale, the Adam who thinks Eve's apple will win his Eve back, and it being Jeremy Renner keeps Rian Johnson's tradition of making his villains former Avengers from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Chris Evans in Knives Out, Edward Norton in Glass Onion, and now Hawkeye. And hey, in this one, they ultimately get Thanos. But also a last name like Sharp is another example of Rian Johnson hiding the villain in plain sight as the one who kills with a sharp object. Really, all the names in this movie are deliciously meaningful. A name like Judd likens his character to Judas, the traitor to Jesus that Spy Wednesday is named after. Wicks, as in a wick being a pseudonym for a penis, which Wicks hypocritically used to make Cy. Samson is the Old Testament strongman who died after collapsing a building from the inside. Martha was Mary's sister, who was known for toiling away with chores, often corrected by Jesus. Then we meet Lee Ross, Andrew Scott, a local sci-fi writer. I like how his first book says 1 million copies in print, and then the review on his third book is by Hugh McClelland, who's the art director of this movie. We meet Simone Vivon, Kaylee Spenny, a cellist who now has a nerve condition making it painful for her to play. Wicks is promising to heal her for huge payments to the church. And the montage of Wicks offending newcomer guests, a single mom with her daughter, then a gay couple. He goes from wearing purple, a color worn only during Lent or Advent, to pink, which would mean that at this part of the year he's going from the first or second week of Advent, which is where priests wear purple, that would be before Christmas, to the third week of Advent, which I think is one of the only times priests wear pink vestments. The third walkout wears a mask, suggesting that Wicks is a COVID denier. After his prayer group falls apart, Judd challenges Martha to confess her deepest, darkest sins to Wicks, which she does in proud defiance, which sets off Wicks' new plot to get the Joule. Now, on the bottom of Cy's YouTube page, the videos are titled Non-Binary, Non-Godly, There's No G-O-D and Doge, Racism Doesn't Exist in God's Kingdom, USA, If Kids Want Free Lunch, They Have to Work for It, Insurrection, More Like Free and Fair Election, Santa Can't Be a Minority. Yeesh. On Holy Thursday, after walking in on a meeting between Wicks and his core followers, Judd gets drunk at the Il Diavolo pizza bar and accidentally takes off the Devil Wolf lamp top. Nikolai is played by Noah Segan, a longtime collaborator of Rian Johnson, who played Trooper Wagner in Knives Out and Daryl in Glass Onion. Meanwhile, Rian Johnson's collaborator Joseph Gordon-Levitt also cameos in this film as the voice of the baseball announcer we hear on Samson's TV. Nikolai says,
The junk lamps, come on.
Yeah, notice how he says lamps, a clue that there are actually 2 of them in this bar. So that brings us to Good Friday, the day of the killing. I love how we get all the clues we need the first time Rian Johnson shows us this scene. Like, notice how first we do hear the metallic clank of Wicks' flask. And then when Dr. Nat shouts, "What's wrong?" you do see him stuffing something into his pocket.
What's wrong?
That something is the remote trigger for the squib, as we'll later find out, but Johnson does show us enough of it here. You'll also hear that flask clanking again when Nat pushes past Judd to go into this closet from the stone door, pinning it against the wall. And And of course, Nat doesn't let Judd touch or closely inspect Wicks because Wicks is not dead yet here. He's kind of doing the Professor Plum move. But also, I love this detail. Notice how the red devil wolf is facing to the right when it's just pinned to Wicks' vestments. But then after Martha screams to divert everyone's attention and Nat does the real stabbing, now we see the devil wolf head is facing to the left. So at this point, almost as if realizing these inconsistencies, notice how Judd pauses in his writing for just a moment before he continues. Mila Kunis plays Geraldine, the chief of police. She later says that she owes Detective Elliot a fruit basket for giving her Blanc's number. Detective Elliot was Lakeith Stanfield's character in Knives Out. Cy recorded Judd threatening to cut Wicks out like a cancer, framing Judd as the killer. So as he drops to his knees to pray to Jesus to show him a way through this, the light beams in through the door and in comes Benoit Blanc. Blanc says that he's not religious, but his mother was, though it's complicated. In effect, Benoit Blanc plays the character that Rian Johnson's point of view is, someone who was raised religious but has just kind of drifted away from the church, which makes sense as a skeptic. Also, we learn that Benoit Blanc is gay, so that's probably part of the backstory. Judd asks him how he feels about this church, and as Benoit Blanc describes the architecture and shares his negative opinions of Catholicism, the light outside dims and the church looks darker and menacing.
Get to a truth I can swallow without choking.
Swallow without choking, a little line foreshadowing what Prentice did. But as Judd meets Blanc where he is, agreeing that Catholic doctrine is all essentially storytelling and theatricality, the warm light shines back in through the window as he arrives at a deeper truth.
Guess the question is, did these stories convince us of a lie? Or did they resonate with something deep inside us that's profoundly true?
So Blanc knows just from looking at Judd here that he's innocent, using some quick detective work to see the state of his pants that this guy must have been kneeling in prayer all day. So he's already solved that part. And then Judd recognizes Blanc from a Kentucky Derby case involving a photo finish, something that he talked about on The View. I love all the little bits of lore that we learn about Benoit Blanc and possible future sequels that we might see. So then they inspect Wicks' corpse and notice Josh O'Connor after Blanc plays with it.
Flesh and blood. Flesh and blood. There's a wiggly wiggly.
Yeah, Josh is totally covering his face, which might be to cover him smiling. Back at Il Diavolo, Blanc compares a photo of the site in front of him, including Nikolai in his shirt reading, "I spent the night with Burt Reynolds." Here's where Blanc notices the tops of both Devil Wolf lamps are missing, but Judd only notices Nat's bag. Then as we see Nat in the booth, above that booth, that's Mephisto. Blanc references John Dixon Carr's The Hollow Man from 1935, one of the best known examples of an impossible crime or a locked room crime mystery story. It tells the story of three illusionist brothers who are trying to kill each other, and ultimately we learn that the murder victim was actually the attempting perpetrator who sort of staged his own death and ends up dying in a death trap that he created. In a way, that's kind of what happens to Wicks in this movie, or at least that's what Martha orchestrates for Wicks. The spring reading list that Judd helped Martha send out earlier, Judd retrieves now, and all the other titles are similar impossible crime mystery stories that Rian Johnson used as inspiration for this movie, including Whose Body by Dorothy L. Sayers, The Murder in the Rue Morgue by Edgar Allan Poe, The Murder of Roger Ackroyd by Agatha Christie, and Agatha Christie's The Murder at the Vicarage. Rian Johnson also cited Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None. When Martha peeks into the church at Blanc, it's the same framing as Martha as a younger girl peeking in at Prentice. Blanc, Geraldine, and Judd run through the possibilities of how Wicks could have been killed in this utility closet, and when Blanc asks if anything else was found on the floor, notice how Judd turns away. He's hiding the fact that Wicks' flask was there as well, and he doesn't want Benoit Blanc to see the look on his face because he's still trying to hide it. Meanwhile, Geraldine mentions two red threads. Those would be what attach the wolf devil head to the vestments. The bearded cop who reviews the footage throughout this movie is played by Dan Sheridan, part of the longtime writing team Rian Johnson collaborates with on his scripts. Dan Sheridan also appears in Paul Thomas Anderson's movies, and he played Comrade Josh in One Battle After Another, the guy part of that hilarious scene with Leo DiCaprio over the phone. This cop's monitor is surrounded by various nerdy collectibles, including some Star Wars figurines that remind us of Rian Johnson's past work. Here's where they figure out that an RF signal did emit around the time of Wicks' collapse, but Blanc refuses to say out loud in front of the cops how it all connects. So he drives Judd back home, and here has him write out his version of events, and now we know why Blanc was speechless before, because he knows that that clangy thud was Wicks' flask, and that Judd must have been the one to stash it. And meddling with the crime scene would have made Judd look even more suspicious to Geraldine, and they might have arrested him right there. Today's video is sponsored by Blue Chew. Everybody has a different favorite thing about Christmas. Some people like decorating the tree, others like opening presents, and some people like stuffing stockings. And since Blue Chew is sponsoring this video, I'll let you figure out exactly what kind of stocking stuffing I'm getting at here. And just in time for Christmas, famous Blue Chew Gold is here to help. Blue Chew Gold is the newest innovation from the #1 chewable ED brand. It has 2 ingredients for blood flow to keep your sleigh bells ringing, mixed with apomorphine and oxytocin to turn up the arousal and connection in your brain and body. It dissolves under your tongue and works in as little as 15 minutes. Getting started with Blue Chew is super easy. Just sign up at bluechew.com, consult with one of their licensed medical providers, and once you're approved, you'll receive your prescription within days. It's all done online. That means no visits to the doctor's office, no awkward conversations, and no waiting in line at the pharmacy. Blue Chew's tablets are made in the USA and prepared and shipped direct to your door in a discreet package. Make life easier by getting harder and discover your options at bluechew.com. And we've got a special deal for our listeners. Get 10% off your first month of Blue Chew Gold with code Rockstars. That's promo code Rockstars. Visit bluechew.com for more details and important safety information, and we thank Blue Chew for sponsoring this video. Now, Judd only did this because Samson has stayed sober all this time because he thinks Wicks has also gone sober with him, so he wants to protect Sam. Blanc looks at Sai's YouTube channel, whereas before, Sai only had 200 or so subscribers. Now he has over 410,000. Also, I'm pretty sure he A/B tested the thumbnail of the God Only Invented 2 Pronouns video, or at least swapped the thumbnail. Also, at the bottom of the YouTube channel, you can see an ad for Apexosity. Apexosity, you'll remember, is the broy energy drink that Duke Cody was shilling for in Glass Onion. You remember Duke, who don't do pineapple. The following morning is Easter Sunday, the day of Wick's burial. We see the clip of his final homily as he says,
"You shall not pass."
And from that line, we cut to Wicks in white. It's gotta be a Gandalf reference because he screamed, "You shall not pass," to the Balrog, and then in Two Towers resurrected as Gandalf the White. Martha asks to be alone with the body, but as we will see later, it's also that she can swap in Samson, who, remember, we saw building this coffin, meaning he was the one who designed it to have the trick hatch. And notice that it's Nat who puts the lid on it so that no one else will see that it's actually Samson inside, not Wicks. Lee says,
"Some libtard will make a podcast about all of this, and before you know it, the idiot versions of all of us will end up on Netflix."
Rian Johnson biting the hand. And now that Netflix is buying Warner Brothers, maybe all things will have idiot versions on Netflix. Sai shares a video of what the Palm Sunday meeting was about. Vera revealed Wick's acknowledgement of parentage for Sai.
He is my heir, my son.
Yeah, notice how he says heir first, because he only did that legal maneuver in Brooklyn so that these two would share the wealth and use it to try to make Wicks famous and powerful. Vera considers Wicks a hypocrite for shaming the harlot whore when he also bore a son out of wedlock. Then Wicks uses all of their confessions to him against them, threatening to destroy their reputations. But when it comes to Martha, notice he says nothing, knowing that he knows about the diamond. Cyrus says it was he who told Wicks to burn them all, offering to take his wealth and make Wicks punditry an internet sensation.
Together, we can build a real empire as father and son.
Like in Star Wars?
Yeah, exactly like the Rebels.
Of course, Rian Johnson would work in a joke about a toxic internet bro completely misinterpreting Star Wars. Blanc realizes the Eve's apple base that Prentice left Grace that contains a Jesus has an indent in the setting way too deep for just a hollow Jesus figurine. As Judd calls Louise to see who placed the tomb construction order a few days early, as she talks about how mean Wicks was and asks Judd to pray for her and her mother on hospice, the light outside fades into a storm as Judd is pulled away from sleuthing back into service as a priest. He references a road to Damascus moment, the New Testament story of Saul, who saw the light of God on his way to Damascus and was blinded, and then the scales fell from his eyes as he was converted to the truth of Jesus' resurrection and became a devoted follower of Christ, now going by Paul. As Judd and Benoit argue, a dark figure with a lantern passes in the background. This, as we'll see later, is Nat Sharp, but for a moment we think it's Samson. Blanc sees the police lights approaching and calmly sends Judd back to the rectory to stall Geraldine. When Geraldine brings up fictional investigator Gideon Fell's fourth explanation for the locked room crime from the Hollow Man, an explanation that Blanc omitted, she realizes the stabbing must have occurred in those 9 seconds.
That's how it was done, right?
Yes.
Now Blanc says yes here because technically Wicks was stabbed with a knife in that general moment of time, but because she uses passive tense, he doesn't name Judd as the stabber. Now as Judd goes through the woods, he hears an iPhone ping. That's what causes him to look over at the tomb. We find out later that ping was Nat texting Samson inside the tomb to sit up, grab the jewel, and push down the Lazarus door. Knowing that this movie is called Wake Up Dead Man, it is pretty insane to see the Lazarus door come down the first time. As soon as it falls, the floodlight from Samson's house lights up, meaning that the motion sensor camera is recording. Now, since Judd had seen Samson hooded with the lantern on the night he was drunk, he assumes that the hooded figure here is Samson, getting tackled by a zombie or ghost version of Wicks. And when a fist comes through the darkness to punch Judd, since it was Wicks earlier who socked him in the stomach, we assume it's Wicks now. So now it's really Judd's own superstition and his sleep deprivation and his dizziness that leads him to see this figure as Wicks. But really, it's just a vision anyway, because while he wakes up with his hand on the gardening tool in Sam's chest, later we know that Judd was knocked out this whole time and that Nat was just the one who stabbed Samson. I do love the running gag of Lee always turning his home into a fortress of the moat, specifically after Wicks cast him out of his fortress, and then after the storm we see him heaving his suits of armor back upright. And I love how in this movie Rian Johnson dispels his own iPhone myth that started with Knives Out, with this close-up of Nat's phone. It's an iPhone. Remember, in Knives Out, Rian Johnson said Apple wouldn't let villain characters be shown using Apple products, which led to film nerds on the internet and comments of every movie after that applying that as a kind of universal rule. But that rule only applied to Knives Out when Rian Johnson produced it with Lionsgate before he got that Netflix money. So Nat is certainly a villain in the story, and we very clearly see him using an iPhone. So thank you, Rian Johnson, for putting that to bed. When Judd walks into a police station, of course, Rian Johnson had one of the cops eating a donut, even though it's nighttime. Blanc's car stereo was in the middle of Skimble Shanks the Railway Cat from Andrew Lloyd Webber's musical Cats. It's another running bit from this series, how Blanc is a lover of musical theater. In Knives Out, he hummed Losing My Mind from Stephen Sondheim's Follies. Sondheim himself cameoed in Glass Onion in that Zoom game that Blanc was playing. And later in this movie, Blanc plays the overture of Andrew Lloyd Webber's Phantom of the Opera to stop Judd from talking. In Nat's basement, they find Wick's corpse positioned as if he was strangling Nat in some dissolving fluid. Blanc finds a bottle of pentobarbital in Nat's bag, and Blanc, as someone trained in various toxic substances, knows immediately what the symptoms of this would be and to look for them. And Blanc, as a skeptic who began this movie hating the theatrics of church rituals, now finds himself at the bow of the pulpit preaching to the congregation. When he points out the second missing devil wolf head lamp top, Judd says,
Two devils.
Because in each phase of this mystery, there were two devils at play working together. In phase 1, the two devils were Wicks and Cy, father and son. But in phase 2 of the mystery, the devils were Martha and Nat. But here, Blanc only explains the simple how of Wick's death. Nat triggered the squib on the devil head, which was painted the same red as Wick's Good Friday vestments and sewn on the back to blend in. And after Wicks collapsed from the pentobarbital in the flask, and when everyone was looking away due to Martha, that's when Nat stabbed him dead for real. Now, as to the why for all this complexity, it's kind of the reverse of the donut hole within a donut hole from Knives Out. Instead, it's a donut hole surrounding the donut hole. As Blanc speechifies, he turns his back to the pews and watch Martha in the background.
But then risen by the will of God, risen as something new, no longer a fallible man, but now a symbol of the Lord's power over death.
Yes, Martha brings her hand up to her lips, which Blanc will notice her do a second time right as he readies for Benoit Blanc's final checkmate over the mysteries of faith. He'll later point out the second time he sees it, but Rian Johnson shows us one that Blanc does not see here just for the viewer. And realizing the symptoms of the drugs and what Martha has done, he realizes his own folly, and now it won't serve anyone to deliver that final checkmate. I wonder if Blanc, somewhere in Martha, he sees his own mother and remembers whatever went down between them in his youth. I assume that's what comes over Benoit when the sunlight hits him, giving him his own road to Damascus moment. He surrenders his opportunity to be the know-it-all once again, to solve the case for everyone. And I love the little moment here.
And would you consider blurbing my book?
No.
It reminds me a lot of this hilarious moment from Glass Onion.
It's so dumb.
It's so dumb, it's brilliant.
No! It's just dumb.
Just letting Daniel Craig go, no, is just really funny. Martha gives her confession, and we see how Prentice's final communion was Eve's apple, a massive diamond that he choked down and died. This moment is shown with green and blue glass on either side of young Martha, and then red glass surrounding Prentice, which matched the colored glass on Judd's bedroom window that Benoit Blanc looks through at a key moment in the movie. It also reminds me of the multicolored prism that ultimately revealed the truth of the red envelope, and then therefore the missing red envelope in Glass Onion. Blanc reveals that Prentice's daughter Grace knew he bought a diamond by the fact that the case was a $20,000 custom Fabergé box that must have contained something super valuable and much heavier than a hollow Jesus figurine. And we learn that Grace wasn't just trashing the church, she was desperately searching for her one path to freedom after a lifetime of being trapped. Martha learned that Wicks was planning on stealing the diamond, but then seeing the false face of the hollow man from the book cover through the glass of that case, through the glass onion of it, you could say, it's the book from the book club reading list that she mailed out. She hatches her own plan to use Wicks acts to fake a miracle, knowing that a martyr killed on Good Friday and resurrected on Easter Sunday would just be too powerful of a symbol for any wayward Catholic to ignore. So now, looking back, we could see that every time Martha dropped to her knees screaming about a miracle, she wasn't some fanatical nun that we all thought she was just playing a part to help sell the illusion that she had orchestrated. We learned that Martha enlisted Nat, who had access to the tranquilizer to put in Wick's flasks, and a doctor who could stab Wicks when the window opened. She enlisted Samson to pose as Wick's corpse in the coffin and in the tomb to snatch the jewel from Prentice's remains, and then to push down the Lazarus door, which they would have recorded, all so they could sell this as a miracle. Blanc was able to see this because, as someone outside the church, he understands that most of its storytelling is just theater and spectacle. But what he learns in this movie is that the razzle-dazzle doesn't always sell a lie, it often just sells a truth that resonates deep in our souls. And for Martha, it was the power of her belief in what the church could do if ridden of its worst temptations, named after the ultimate temptation from the Garden of Eden. So when Martha visits Nat, only after he takes a sip from that cup and audibly gulps does she tell him that she did visit the crypt and found Samson dead. But we find out after this that she had already switched the cups after she dropped the jewel, so Nat drank his own poison. She ultimately turned the tables on the way Miles Braun kills Andy in Glass Onion. I love this shot of Nat's body thumping down the stairs, and we see how Martha staged it to look like Wick's resurrected form hunted down his own killer and delivered the Lord's vengeance. As Martha comes closer to death, she asks forgiveness for Wicks, for Nat, for Samson, but Judd adds grace to the list. At first, Martha's fist tightens around the Eve's apple diamond, we'll find out later, but then, perhaps by the virtue of the person's name being Grace, or finally just realizing that the vanity she exercised as an old woman was the same vanity she weaponized against Grace when she was a girl, and her grip loosens. Ultimately, we learn it was envy. Martha wanted to be Prentice's daughter, and she envied Grace for that position, and knowing the final resting place of that jewel was Martha's way of stealing the inheritance that really did belong to someone else. In a way, it was the parable of the prodigal daughter. For a story that sets out to be a cynical hit job on the Catholic Church and all the corrupt people in positions of power within that church, Rian Johnson ultimately shows how the rituals of Catholicism are ultimately quite healing for many. There is true power in confession and absolution. And so Martha releases the jewel.
Shit.
I like how she was jump scaring Judd all movie, getting him to say shit all the time, so it makes sense that there is one last one. In the epilogue, Lee's book signing is filled with the exact survivalist fans that he complained about before, all of them looking like John Goodman's character from The Big Lebowski. On Vera's realtor sign, Elena Zokas is the name of Rian Johnson's unit production manager. Overall, this Simone is playing the folk hymn of Simple Gifts over the cello, a song that if you're a Catholic who's gone to church on Easter, you'll hear as the theme of The Lord of the Dance, and she's playing through the pain in her legs and finding her daily bread in that. Demands to know where the jewel is, but Judd says that he hopes he finds what he's looking for and then drops this.
Your real inheritance is in Christ.
It is exactly what Prentice told Grace, but also that's literally where the diamond is. He's saying, if you just come to church and sit in the pews and wait for the sun to cross that crucifix at the right moment, you'll see it. But also, you're probably gonna have your own road to Damascus moment. You'll see the glint of the jewel in Christ's heart. And I think Judd is betting by then, he'll be good enough a priest who anyone who sees that will just see it as God's light and won't want the diamond, making it the perfect place to keep it. So as we hear Tom Waits come up to the house and see this diamond winking at us from the bowels of another martyr, we are reminded of how Rian Johnson hides the MacGuffins in his mystery movies. It's so perfect that this movie's final image is a treasure hidden in plain sight. I loved this movie, and comment down below with your thoughts and what you loved about it. A special thanks to one of our YouTube members, Paulo Bianca, for supporting us at the executive producer level. Big thanks to Studio Tech Brian Kim, New Rockstars editors Joshua Stephen Hurd and Abby Freel, and supporting editors Aaron Carrion, Devin Cleary, and Jacqueline Rogers for their work on this video. Follow me at EA Voss and subscribe to all the channels in the New Rockstars network for breakdowns and news coverage of everything you love. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.